Hello and welcome to a special edition of the Game Informer Show. I'm your host, Ben Hansen, joined by special buddy Ben Reeves.
Here I am.
You wrote the Gears of War 4 cover story.
Sure did. Yeah, it was a fun time. We went up to Vancouver, you, me, and JV, and
we talked all about it.
We had a good time.
And we talked all about it on this show.
Yeah.
And kind of gave you our impressions of the game and gave you some answers to some burning questions, I hope. Mm-hmm. But the point of this special edition episode is to answer even more of your questions.
Right.
So what we did
Fan questions.
So we posted on GameInformer.com this whole news post looking for the community and fans to submit questions for Rod Fergusson, who's the studio head up at the Coalition. And he's been on the Gears of War franchise since way back in the day at Epic. Yeah, for sure. So we got a bunch of questions, boiled it down to the ones that he conceivably could answer, because obviously they're not going all in on multiplayer, everything like that.
They're not going to tell you the end of the game.
So that is in the chat coming up. But we should set up Rod Fergusson a little bit. We talked about him in kind of like our Impressions podcast, but just to explain, this guy, I think, has had a legendary career.
Bloodwake, you ever heard of that game?
You ever heard of Counter-Strike on the Xbox?
Yeah. Oh.
No, Microsoft Train Simulator. But then obviously produced Gears of War 1 through 3, started working on Judgment, a ton of great work at Epic. And then beyond that went and he basically was the reason that BioShock Infinite shipped. Is that fair to say,
He's
Ben Reeves?
the guy that came in and busted some heads and finally got that out the door, from my understanding.
Yeah, I think it was a tough project, and he came in at the tail end to button it up and slap it on a plastic lunchbox, as they say. And then he went over to 2K for a little while, and then he went up to the Coalition as like the core of Gears to kind of carry on the legacy up there.
And now he's doing Gears 4.
Yeah, and we have him on this podcast, so here's Rod Fergusson, everybody.
Take it away.
Rod Fergusson, welcome to the Game Informer Show, sir.
Hey, thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I think you've been on the show before at some point in the past.
Yeah, I believe so. A few years ago, when I actually made a trip out to you guys' offices, and we had the Juicy Lucy and all that good stuff. When we played some Bloodwake, and yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah, that's right. The best Minnesota has to offer: Juicy Lucy and Bloodwake on the original Xbox. Yeah, which Rod worked on.
Highway 94. Yeah.
We've got a ton of questions for you from the community. Some of it's pretty nitty gritty stuff, but I love the nitty gritty stuff. I think that's the advantage of these podcasts. Is like no one else is going to talk about this type of stuff, but the fans have very specific questions for you, Rod, about Gears of War 4.
I imagine they do.
All right, let's start it off here. Ordinary Goose.
Very non-specific answers.
Ordinary Goose writes in and says, I was playing the first Gears of War on Xbox One, which was one of the best remasters ever, by the way, and I couldn't help but notice that although practically every third-person game with guns has been heavily influenced by Gears, none of them play quite like it. For the life of me, I can't figure out why. What do you think it is about Gears of War's gameplay that makes it so distinct even after so many years?
I think some of it, it's a lot about focus, and I think there's a lot of stuff under the covers that people just don't recognize. And I think part of it, there's a magic to its simplicity. And so the way that we worked on cover and then refined it, I mean, it got better from 1, 2, and 3, but even so, there's a lot of things underneath the covers that people don't see. But every time somebody tries to come to something like a cover-based shooter, I think they try to go like, here, it's going to be Gears of War, but something different, right? It's going to be Gears of War plus, or, and I think they sometimes can push it. Although by adding some more to it, I think they actually take away what makes some of it work really well. So I think that has a lot to do with it.
It's interesting. So, I mean, you've talked a lot on the trip about how tough it is to kind of recreate that feel of Gears and how meticulous the Coalition is about it, but yet you describe it as simple. How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, because I think if you're doing, it's the swimming duck, right? Like it should look simple and feel simple, but you're paddling like crazy underneath. I think there's a lot that goes into it in the way that you think about it. And like I said, we evolved it a lot in terms of the way you have to think about, vectors of entry and stickiness and omnidirectional versus non and cardinal, and the way that you have to think about different aspects of the way the weapons work, and the fact that you take a little extra damage and you hear the sound to tell you should be in cover. Like there's lots of little things that go in to make a greater whole, but how it should be presented is relatively straightforward. And we even talked about it a lot. But one of the nice things about Gears in some respects is that it can almost be a one-stick game. The way we used to talk about the ability, like I use one stick to move forward and I get into cover, and then I use the other stick to look around and I see where I want to go, and then I use the movement stick to get to where I want to go, and then I use the look stick to look around. Like it has a little less, we always talked about it not having to require that whole like rub your stomach, pat your head all the time, trying to manipulate as people were first learning how to do dual stick gaming. I felt like there was a if you were coming to it as a first time, and there was a simplicity in like, oh, run forward, now I'm safe in cover, I can look around, I can assess, figure it out. Whereas at the time, first-person shooters were all into strafing and bullet dodging and all this stuff that was just high dexterous games. And I think now what you've seen as as the decade has passed with Gears, that with wall balancing and all the other sort of the skill gap between the new player and the professional player is quite high, and it's because they found ways to sort of add some sophistication and complexity into how the controls work.
Sure. So Barrow34 wants to know, he says, will Gears of War 4 shoot from the barrel of the gun like Gears 2 and 3, or the center of the screen like Gears Ultimate Edition and Judgment?
It's Gears 3. Like we went a lot of, our inspiration for 4 is Gears 3. And so we looked at the other games and Judgment and UE in terms of saying like what's working, what worked in there, and why did it work, and then but our baseline is Gears 3, and then we're building on top of that.
Gotcha. A guy named Ben writes in and says, are you going to bring back arcade mode modifiers, mutations to the campaign?
TBD. It's something that we're looking at, but it's something that right now we're really focused on delivering the core experience. Like I said, when we got to 3 and we introduced arcade mode, we were trying to increase replayability of the campaign and those sorts of things, and it felt like a good time to do that. But right now, the team, this is the first Gears of War experience this team is building, and we're really focused on delivering that core experience as opposed to like, how do we mess it up a lot? Like, we're just, right now, it's all about like, how do we deliver what we want to deliver?
Well, speaking of that core experience, a guy named Big B Dog BR writes in and says, the game looks amazing so far. He's curious about the Coalition's thoughts on vehicle segments, if you see that as part of Gears' identity.
Vehicle segments by themselves, like just the words vehicle segments, I don't know that I would say that's part of our identity. I think the things that we talk about and what Epic and Cliff have talked about as well is this notion of the palate cleanser. Is like, I think there's moments that what we feel like is because we look at the core gameplay, that stop and pop gameplay. When you do that, you're doing a lot. One of the things we really wanted to have is this ability to say, hey, for some period of time, a very short or reasonable amount of time, is that you do this palate cleanser, your sherbet between courses where, oh, I'm doing something, I'm driving a vehicle, or I'm riding on the back of a Reaver, or I'm, whatever, that just is a break from that. And then you go back to it and it feels new and fresh again. And so I think palate cleansers are core to our DNA, and I think that's things we'll be working on. But to say it's strictly a vehicle segment, I don't know that I would say that.
So with Gears of War 4, I mean, do you consider the wind flares those palette cleansers then?
Not kind of in the way that you would consider a boss fight a palette cleanser, because a lot of times, historically, and maybe to a detriment in the past anyway, that not every boss fight was leveraging the core combat rules, and so there was a lot of exceptions when you played our boss fights. But I do see, like, that's one of the things that we looked at is we really see, like, as you saw, when the storm wall comes in and the lightning flurries strike, and you have to kind of do that. You have that very intense moment for a period of time. That to us is representative of what we would consider a boss fight now.
Okay. But not ruling out vehicle segments for Gears of War 4?
No, like I said, we try to find things that allow you to do new and interesting stuff to take a break from core so you can go back to it sort of refreshed. But it's not something that like we're always saying, now, okay, what's our vehicle segment? We don't do that. We do, hey, where are our palette cleansers?
Okay. Cheeseburger95 wants to know, can we expect large enemies like the Brumax in Gears of War 4? That's part of, I think, what I would say is part of our DNA, how these sort of the over-the-topness and the idea of monsters. I think, again, we took what was the mammoth Gears 3, and we've kind of tried to take things a lot more intimate and personal and to kind of go back to that core of the onion, if I keep mixing metaphors, and so that we have a place to grow and go beyond that. So I think that's part of our DNA, the amount of that's in 4. Like, that's one of the we talked about, was like the notion of we're building a saga here. We're not just building one game as an isolated thing. And so that's one of the things that we're doing more methodically, is not every time it's like, what's every idea we have, get it in now. Like, it's not that anymore. It's more about, okay, what's all the ideas we have, at least right now, and then how does that plot on where we think it makes the most sense fictionally or technology-wise or what have you, and then we can feel better about how we kind of roll things in. So, we're starting small and growing, but that's not to say there won't be. I'm just saying, like, I just don't want people to think like, oh, the Leviathan is, now we have 12 of them. Like, it's not that kind of thing, right? It's we have to go back to something where I used to joke that by the time you got to Gears 3 and wretches were nothing, like killing a wretch was nothing. But if a real wretch jumped into your office right now, you lose your shit, right? Like, it's just, those things individually are scary as hell. But by the time you got to Gears 3, they were just a thing. Like, they just, they were fodder. And so to me, is trying to get back to finding a way, and the juvies are a part of that, about like, how do we make an individual juvie by itself
scary in some of the ways is its ability to call in reinforcements and its high mobility and the crazy sounds and that kind of stuff. But it's how do I get it back to a more personal level of tension?
Sure. And something we saw at the studio, you guys haven't released art for it yet, but the Snatcher monsters, are those, I don't think we had a like scale reference for those things. Are those things big? Are they human sized?
No, they're bigger than that. I mean, that's their role is to be able to take people, so they have to be able to, snatch them and take off. So they're definitely bigger than that. And so that's something we've been playing with in terms of that scale.
Okay, gotcha. So Crying Ryan writes in and he says, will there be any asymmetrical co-op parts like there were in the other games? The parts where the characters were split up?
Yeah. I mean, that's, again, co-op, we always talked about co-op is the cake, not the icing, and when we were building the first trilogy. And that's something that's still true to us today. And so we look at leveraging kind of all the tools we have in sort of the co-op toolbox. And so we think asymmetrical co-op, whether that be path splits or just different roles, for us, we try to push ourselves to not just be co-op mean a second gun in the world. Like, we want to find ways of how can we actually provide some levels of either role-based or task-based that cause much. Like, I think one of my favorite aspects of that is, if you go back to the Ultimate Edition, is the spotlight on and getting Dom through or whatever through the Krill section. Like, that to me is very asymmetrical co-op. And so that's the kind of things I think we strive for. So do we hit it all the time? Probably not, but it's something that's we focus on and talk about a lot, about like what are the asymmetrical co-ops and how are we doing more than just the second gun.
Sure. Penultimate Spaz writes in, and he's talking about how in previous gears there are always 4 members on the team. Even if you're only controlling 2, the other 2 characters would kind of swap out and whatnot. And he's noticing that with the new squad, there's 3 members. Is it set at 3, or does that imply that a 4th person is going to be joining at a certain point, even if they're not playable?
It's a mixture. Like we've introduced, you were introduced to 2 other characters beyond the 3 in your article, right, with Oscar and Reina, and so like those are things that there are times when there's 3, there's times when there's more because of those sort of relationships. But so it's not really set. Okay,
gotcha. Let's see. That sniper wants to know about the new weapons. What's your favorite new weapon of the Gears of War 4?
My favorite new weapon. In multiplayer, it's the drop shot for sure, and just it's kind of like, it's like a boom shot meets digger kind of weird marriage thing that it's really satisfying. Might be because it's slightly overpowered right now as we balance it, so I really enjoy using an overpowered weapon in multiplayer because my skills aren't going to hold up, so the weapon better. And then I think, but in the campaign where you guys saw the buzzkill, like being able to throw out circular saw blades in rapid succession that are reflecting around the universe and just causing mass carnage how could that not be fun? So
yeah, definitely. So you mentioned the digger real quick. Something that I don't think we've touched on in the articles yet, but was interesting, is just talking about the weapons that can't be in Gears of War 4 because of emulsion. So which ones are off the table?
Well, it would be the ink grenade. So the ink grenade, if you look closely, is actually a small nemesis. The nemesis are the things that got shot out of cedars and inked the sky. And so this was a caged little baby nemesis. That was where the ink came from, was from the ink from those nemesis. So they're gone. And then the digger was actually a creature that chewed underground and popped up. And so the bullets essentially for the digger rifle are gone as part of wiping out the locust. So so those 2 weapons are off the table.
Gotcha. So Presence wants to know, how does the shotgun work? Spread damage, etc. A lot of the game's success will hinge on it being good, so it's nice to know in advance.
Yeah, I think that's something that the team is, Ryan Clevin, who you had to meet, who's the lead multiplayer designer, is something he's very focused on. I certainly learned a lot over the 3 in terms of, as we got into pellet spreads and patterns and how things mean so much, and even revisiting it for UE, where we were sort of limited a little bit by what was in the code base for Gears 1. We could do certain things, but not others. It's certainly a challenge, and I think it's always going to be that way in the sense of like just a challenge for us to constantly try to get people to feel, because part of the problem that you have, like the very first, like to give you an example, like the very first Gears 1 shotgun was essentially when you fired, it basically said that the pellets would go in a random direction anywhere in this cone. And so you could actually fill the screen with 3/4 of the enemy and pull the trigger, and all 8 pellets would go into the top left corner and miss. And it felt, and though it was part of the game, was the notion of like, hey, it's a shotgun, you don't quite know where every pellet's going to go. There are times when you'd be like, aha, and then nope, and so it felt really bad. And see over 1, 2, and 3. And 3, we started doing a lot more around showing you squibs, like blood squibs, when you actually hit. So there was like, it wasn't so much about what was on your screen, but if you saw a squib, you hit. If you didn't see a squib, you actually missed, even though maybe it felt like you should have. And so that's something that we're just spending paying a lot of attention to. We know it's, potentially the most popular weapon it is the most popular weapon for multiplayer. And so we know how important it is, and it's something Orion has dedicated a lot of time to.
Do you feel like you have it there right now?
Yeah, I think we're, like I said, I think, when you take a weapon like that and then you insert multiplayer latency, sometimes, like, every game has it, right? Like every game has that notion of, I shot a guy, he ran 3 more feet and then fell, or like that kind of stuff. And it has nothing necessarily to do with the game. It's just the fact that, hey, I've got 200 milliseconds to the server and 200 milliseconds back, and guess what? In that time, stuff happens, or the server corrects, and I should have hit, but the server said you weren't correct, so that whole client-side hit detection we added. And so there's a bunch of stuff that goes on to that. So I feel really good about where we are, but can I go out and say, like, definitively on day one, no one's going to bitch at me about the shotgun? I think historically we found no matter what we do, someone's going to bitch at me about the shotgun. So I just accept that and know that we're doing the best we can to kind of make it as best we can.
Sure. Woods 419 says, can you explain the execution system, like weapon-specific executions? How many are there? What is that like?
Oh, I mean, the notion generally has been that we just have one unique one for every weapon. So every weapon has its own. So when you walk up, if you press Y, you do a unique execution. There's been a couple sort of variances where in Gears 3, the Locust had a race-specific or species-specific execution where we had them rip off the arm and beat the guy with it, because we just didn't feel like a human. Fictionally felt weird for a cog to walk up and rip an arm off somebody and bang somebody, right? So we said, well, that's fine for a monster, not so cool for humans. And then we had the punch, which is like where that was based, like where the cog you can hold Y and you can just keep punching them over and over and over again. But that's sort of the system we're still looking at, except that we've added beyond every weapon has its own, like even the buzzkill and the drop shot. You saw the drop shot, the picking them up by the head and shooting them into the distance.
Yeah.
You can see the buzzkill one where it's kind of drops the spinning saw blades into the middle of their chest and essentially cuts them in half while they're on the ground. But there's also the knife executions that you see now, the close combat sort of executions where you can get close enough to somebody, pull a specific cover maneuver like a yank or a vault, and then you can use your combat knife to stab them in the head in any number of ways based on just variety, like based on angle of attack, and then based on the variety within that, you'll get different kinds of executions.
Sure.
Cool. Well, we have a bunch of multiplayer questions to ask you as well. So
I'll be happy to defer those.
No comment. Well, we'll see. I think some of these maybe you'll have a comment on. Apocalypse, he writes in, he says, what is your opinion on the way Gears of War is played online? Specifically the focus on shotgun battles, wall bouncing, and close quarters combat, when the campaign and horde mode are quite the opposite. Do you feel that this is part of the reason why the multiplayer has such a steep learning curve? And by the way, thanks for making such an awesome game. Gears 3 is still on my disc tray and played at least 10 hours a week.
10 hours a week?
Which is crazy.
That's great. I think that, initially, I think it's one of those things where you sort of have to come to terms with certain things as a designer. Like you start off, Lee Perry, when he worked on this, and in his head, I think he had, not to speak for Lee, but when he had it in his head, a lot of the stuff that he was looking for was a very tactical game, like a very move through the environment, sort of cover to cover, leapfrogging each other, kind of SWAT teamish, and using the assault rifle and all that stuff. And as we saw, like when it goes live and this shotgun's so gratifying, and they get in the shotgun battles and they become a lot more movement based and skill based, what you see in the versions is a little bit of the development team, I think, kind of struggling with that. And so we pushed against it. And so what you see is the invention of stopping power to try to slow the shotgunner who's racing at you. And then you see the sawed-off shotgun and the retro lancer to as weapons for lower skilled players to counter a shotgun player, that kind of stuff, right? And those were like going kind of trying to say like, no, you're not, it's weird to say, and I don't say we ever literally said this, but it's a little bit like, hey, you're not playing our game the way we wanted you to, right? And so it's a little bit of that. And so I think what you're seeing now, as you look at what we did with Gears UE with esports, and I think what you'll see in Gears 4 is there's is a broadening across all aspects, and there's an acceptance. So there's this notion of like, you know what, Gears is Gears, and you just have to accept what it is and what it's become, and you can't really, in trying to fix it, you'll end up destroying it. So don't do that. But at the same time, there's a recognition about what else is out there, like the steep learning curve, and how do you address that? And so that's something we've been very active about, and it's something I've been really excited about in terms of the ways that, historically, the majority of our effort has been on the campaign, and so now to have, like, on day one when we started with, like, hey, here's Matt Searcy as the lead campaign designer. On that same day, Ryan Cleven starts on multiplayer. And so for the 2 years we've been working on campaign, Ryan has been spending 2 years working on multiplayer. And so there's been this sort of equal focus and really digging in and understanding what are the situations or what are the issues with multiplayer, both from how do you make it make sense from a high skill, how do you deal with the skill gap issues, from accessibility, and how do you allow for casual players to have a fun experience? Because I always liken it to, basketball. Basketball as a sport, you go like, you could ask anybody. I could ask you, like, do you like basketball? And you go like, I love to play basketball. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm about to put you on the court with, 9 NBA players. How's basketball for you now? And you'd be like, I hate basketball. It's the worst thing ever. I'm getting smashed in the face all the time, right? So it's not the sport. It's sometimes the competition. And so that whether it's the after school or the after work gym pickup, or it's your beer league or college or it's pro, it's the same game. It's the court with a ball and 2 nets. What's changing is who's playing it. And that's something we need to look at and recognize as we look about the future of multiplayer in Gears of War. It's that the game, the sport, is great. Now it's just about who you play against.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Frank91. He jumps in. He says, I've been playing Gears since November of 2006, and it's my favorite game / saga. I'm also a competitive Gears player. My question is, will the ability to wall cancel return?
Oh, that one, you know what? No matter what I say now in this moment is going to not go well for me. So what I'm going to say is, because I'm not because there's a bunch of nuance. So if I try to explain it, it won't go over the way I want you to. So all I'm going to say is, please play the beta. Anybody has questions like that kind of stuff, like I even think the center of the shotgun, or how does the shotgun feel, or is there wall counseling or wall bouncing and all that stuff. All I can say is, like, Ryan and the team have been working really hard on that stuff. They're fully aware about those sorts of issues, even weapon sliding and all that stuff, like all the little low-level stuff that sometimes borderline between, is it a feature or is it an exploit, that I think people just pick up the beta and then give us feedback. Like, don't rail on me today not knowing how it actually plays. Like, actually play it and then tell me.
And how do you get into the beta?
So the beta, there's a couple ways. Have we announced both aspects of the beta? I'm sorry, I had them over here. So there's the main way, or the 2 main ways. So one of them is to get it in early access. So that's on April 18th. And that's by playing Gears of War Ultimate Edition anytime. And we just extended the window of availability. So if you play Ultimate Edition prior to April 10th, either the Windows 10 version or the Xbox version, you can get into the beta early. And that will mean like 12:01 on the 18th, because it's a technical beta, so we're going to be rolling people in over time to make sure our servers hold up. So that the waves will start going out on the 18th, and so you'll get in then for that. So you'll get early access, and then on the 25th, that's when we'll open the gates. And assuming everything went well on the 18th, God willing, then on the 25th, then we'll have gold members can go in and jump in as well.
Are you feeling confident about the beta at this point? Like, how rough is the game in this state? Like, I mean, like Halo 5 is a good example of, they let people in so early with that. Is that a comparable metric?
I don't know exactly where they let people in. So the thing that I think what I want to, you're giving me the opportunity, so I'm going to take it, is like we are actually doing a beta. Like, when I look at some games now, like beta has become a code word for demo, and I get the value of it. I get part of it is it gets you to get a demo out there, and because you use the word beta, it also provides some forgiveness because it may not be perfect. But a lot of times I hear like, game's gone gold, beta starts next week, and I'm like, what? Like, that's not a beta, right? And so right now, like as we're playing our beta, and it's kind of even a slight misnomer, because I'm about to go out and show off the multiplayer to a bunch of press, and I'm bringing a pre-alpha build, and so that's one of those things. Like, our game, what you're going to play on the 18th is is going to be basically an alpha build of our multiplayer. And so that means there's going to be issues and whatever. And so, but it's an actual beta. So it's not it's not a fake demo. It's not a highly polished thing in the sense that it's like set up as a marketing demo. It's actually, hey, we have brand new technology on our servers, and we have brand new features in our clients, and we want that to be tested at scale, and we want your help. And in the meantime, you can also give us a lot of feedback on gameplay and whether it's interesting to you.
Sure.
But it's honest to God a technical beta, so it's not going to be like there is probably going to be things to talk about.
Sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. I had a question too. You guys mentioned that you're going to do couch co-op for the game, the actual campaign, but are you guys looking to do split screen for multiplayer as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Everything, any way that you can play Gears of War 4, you can play it split screen.
Great.
The only thing that'll be at all sort of bigger for you is that multiplayer 60 frames, when you play split screen, is 30, and it's just because the scene complexity and everything else, and doing two windows and that kind of stuff, doing it both views at 60 isn't just not for us possible at this moment.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll just be you'll go from a 60 experience single screen to a 30 split screen.
Oh, that's cool. I'm sure fans will be really excited for that.
Yeah, when you've been embracing split screen in such a big way, I noticed a lot of people were getting nitty-gritty, like, wait, but does that mean multiplayer? You didn't say explicitly.
But I think people are so used to well, they keep taking split screen from us,
from my cold dead hands.
This can't be as
well. It becomes I understand it, right? I understand any sort of those type because it's a hard thing. Like it's not a free feature, right? Because when we go to implement split screen. The notion of now you have two sets of sounds coming through. How do you deal with that? Even the stupid little things, how do you put up a subtitle in split screen? Is it in the middle for both screens? And how do you there's just a lot. And then, hey, that HUD we made, now we have to scale it so it fits into two sets of HUDs. And like I said, then there's performance issues that how do I deal with, are people willing to go from 60 to 30? Or is it, if I was 30, what do I do then? And, and so even when you go backwards, if you look at Gears 3, we were 30 then, and when you split, we were 30 still. But if you look closely, the difference between a single screen and a split screen, there's less things being drawn. It's just, if we had to call out certain stuff to stay at 30 and split. So there's trade-offs there, and so I get those. Those are realistic development trade-offs. You have to decide whether you want to support. But because I go back to co-op is cake to us, it's what defines us, that we could never get rid of that.
Yeah.
So are you guys treating Gears 4's multiplayer as pretty canonical, you can only have stuff in there that's in the game proper, or is that an opportunity in your mind for Easter eggs and other secret goodies for series fans?
Yeah, I mean, we try to I think we leverage all of it. A lot of it once you get into a world where 5 enemies or 10 enemies are coming together in an arena to fight to the death, and then but reborn and go after it again. It kind of it's not something that I'm too worried about from a does it hold up to lore or canon and that kind of stuff, right? So that's an opportunity to certainly go and play. We have tried to do more things that you see, you can see in Gears 1 Epic's Unreal Tournament roots, because in Unreal Tournament the maps were basically developed with no theme in them really whatsoever. It was what was interesting to the level designer at the time, and so you get maps in space and you get maps in the jungle and maps underwater, and it didn't matter, right? And I think if you look at Gears 1 with a critical eye, you'll see Canals doesn't exist in the campaign story at all. It's a nice map, but it harkened back to what was the level designer's interest more than it harkened to what was in the game. And I think as you saw through 2 and 3, we started to do things more that were aligned with they were based on something from the game, so it had a little bit more resonance from it's not the Azura I was on in the campaign, but it's based on Azura, so I kind of feel like I've been there a little bit. And I think that's what we tend to do from hey, let's bring some of what was in the campaign into multiplayer to give it a grounding. But that doesn't mean we can't play and do crazy shit.
Well, that's the thing. I think a lot of fans are really hungry for tie-ins to the previous 4 games. Do you see multiplayer as a good opportunity to kind of satiate that angle more than the campaign?
Oh yeah, but I mean knowing that was the reason why we kept it on Sarah. We talked. In your video, that interview you did. That was the thing when we talked about hey, what do we do? Are we going to a different planet? And then we were wow, to go to a different planet with different characters or different enemies, I think it kind of we'd lose too much. And that was the grounding on Sarah. Allows us to have whatever moment we want to have, whether it's revisiting an old site, whether it's reusing an old weapon, or to get those touchstones to the past, right? And I think you're right that in multiplayer we can definitely play with that a lot more for sure.
Sure.
Gotcha.
So multiplayer might be a place where, like, I don't know, Marcus and Dom could fight with these guys, kind of break the fiction a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we've always had is the notion of the character skins and weapon skins and those sorts of things. And I think, as you look at character skins and stuff in multiplayer, I think that's an opportunity to go do those sorts of things where you can bring Dom back from the dead, or maybe Zombie Dom. Maybe
Zombie Dom.
Ooh, Zombie Dom.
But I mean, being able to revisit some of the characters in multiplayer, I think, is something that would be silly for us not to do.
Dombie, that's what it should have been. Yeah.
Great. Yeah.
All right. Last multiplayer question.
Okay.
The Iceman 2288 asks, will medals and ribbons be returning?
As of right now, yes. So, in fact, in the beta, you should see ribbons. I don't think you'll see medals, but you'll see ribbons in the beta, as they call it, certain accomplishments along the way. So that's something we felt was great from just an engagement standpoint. Like for me, I'm not a very good multiplayer player, but even if I got the first dyed ribbon, at least I got something. Like it was a way to give you something, based on the circumstances. And we really like the rewarding, the kind of incredible moment. Like if you had like the cluster luck, like, oh, killed 3 guys with 1 grenade. Like you want something that, did anybody, that moment when you play and you do something where you go like, did anybody else see that? Like, and then a ribbon comes out and you're like, oh, okay, somebody else did see it.
The machine saw it. Thank you.
So,
Acknowledge me.
yeah, exactly.
Cool. All right. So Frankie187 says, will there be any hints or some explanations to some unanswered questions from previous games in the campaign that might have ramifications for Gears 4? Like the reason behind Gears 2 Sires, what notes did Adam Phoenix hand Baird, or why did Murs survive the blast from Adam's device before Marcus stabbed her? Basically, how much are you looking to kind of tie up some loose ends with Gears' story, or do you want Gears of War 4 to be like a new starting point and not really look back?
Mixture of the two. I mean, I don't feel like, we always talked about the more you explain stuff, the less interesting it becomes. And so you walk this fine line between creating interest because you have open questions and causing people to disconnect because there's too much uncertainty. And so I think we're trying to continue to walk that line. So I don't feel like, hey, the biggest thing we can do with Gears 4 is to go back and explain Gears 1 through 3, or let's really make sure we hammer on explain. Like, I think there's a lot of what I want to do is create an opportunity for some new wonder and and that doesn't mean that in the journey, like, again, as we think of it as a saga and not a one-off, that in the saga that we don't actually learn more and have an opportunity to reveal more. But it's not my number one focus is to go and rationalize the past. More about, especially in the cases where some of the mystery of the past is what is helping to inform things that are interesting in the future.
Right. It's not a Metal Gear Solid 4 situation where you're just completely bogged down. There's a million unanswered questions.
Yes, exactly.
All right.
Yeah. Well, then again, like we've had many conversations, and Cliff has talked about this too, about the notion of once you realize that the serial killer is actually just an abused kid, whatever, like they lose their power as being scary, that kind of stuff, right? And so, so the idea of like, that's one of the things I've worried a little bit about is that because we don't have the mystery of the 14 years that happened before the game started in Gears 1, the fact that you're finding the swarm on that first night, more than I would want to have, you're going to know about the swarm. And that's been something that's been interesting because even the team here wants to be like, yeah, we should show this and we should show that and we should show that. And we're like, no, like that's enough. We've shown enough. Like we have to keep some of the mystery.
Well, I mean, you must have even debated like revealing JD's father. Was that a big discussion point in the office?
Yeah, totally. Well, actually, like any of the reveals, really, like that's why I said if it wasn't for the fact that we have to market this game, it's like that if it were up to me and if I could just somehow talk to everybody that could potentially buy this game without telling them what the story is about or what the enemies are, I would have done that. Like, and that was one of the things that we came away as like, because I didn't want to reveal the monsters. To me, the game is about the discovery of monsters. And so so we've been walking this line of like, we need to assure fans that it's still a monster game, but we still want them to go on the journey of discovery. And so how do we walk that line? So we tried to do that, and we were a little, close-fisted on some of our interviews with you. And because of that, we want people to go through that journey with us. But so that was just a big part of all of that is like, and so then, we still wink at, like, I don't know how many people are going to read their article, and I don't know how many people are going to watch whatever, trailer we end up putting up. And we still did the game where you don't know that JD is Marcus's son, just so that we could play with that a little bit. And so that's kind of like, we didn't go in going like it's a full reveal in the first 10 seconds. We go, hey, JD Phoenix, like we don't do that. Like we, and so, so we tried to hold some of it back as much as we could, but we recognize, like if I just show up with a new face and I don't talk about enemies and you don't know what's going on, I think people would be like, what the hell are they doing over there? So we felt like, hey, by JD's Arx's son, and hey, there's monsters called the Swarm that people were like, okay, at least they're not messing it up too badly. Like that was kind of the thinking.
Gotcha. So Asgardian Ruin says, in the Game Informer article, it stated that JD's relationship with Marcus was somehow strained. This seems as a bit of a rehash of how Marcus himself had a strained relationship with his father before he disappeared. How is the story going to bring in a fresh perspective to this storyline without just kind of retreading the father and grandfather angle there?
Yeah, that's a hard one to answer right now. I think there's a difference between a retread and sort of the past, repeating itself. I think there's some things that are, it's when you realize you're becoming your father in a way, right? Like that's not a retread. That's the reality of like all of a sudden you yell at your kid and you go like, wait, I'm yelling. My stepdad used to always say, we'll see what tomorrow brings. And I'm like, as a kid, I hated that. I just hated it. I'm like, when are we doing this? When are we doing that? And you go like, well, son, we'll see what tomorrow brings. I'm like, I hate you right now. Like, and then, and then there's that moment when my son turns to me and goes like, when are we going to Disney World or whatever? And I'm like, okay, well, let's see what tomorrow brings. I'm like, wait a second, I just said the same stupid line. Like, so to me, that's not so much. I think there's reality in terms of your past informing your present and your future. And that, and I think I don't consider it, oh, it's a retread. I consider there's themes there that have meaning.
Like George Lucas once said, is poetry. It rhymes. Yeah, man. Make it all time. Punk Waste writes in, he says, why does JD Phoenix look exactly like Baird?
I don't think he does. If by Baird you mean he's got blonde hair, then yes, got me. Like
he has facial blindness. Also, Punk Waste.
All blind people. I mean,
all blonde people look the same.
All blind, they look the same to all blind people. That's true.
All right. Civil Knight writes in and says, why are there two moons? What goal is the Coalition trying to convey with that on Sarah?
It's to help with the sort of otherworldliness. Like there's a couple of things around that. I think one of the things we wanted to have was to sometimes I think people forget we're a science fiction game, and so that was part of it, is like helping to like, hey, this is not Earth. Like it feels, it smells and tastes a little bit like Earth, but at the end of the day, it's not Earth. And so that thing you just saw that seems crazy is okay on Sarah, like that kind of stuff, right? And so, and then part of it is practical. Honestly, if I'm going to give you the behind the scenes here, like when you have a game at night, lighting is an issue, as you saw at E3, and so two moons allows us to have a brighter moonlight that allows us to be more well lit, so allows it for the game to be have more lighting in the levels.
Was it never touched on in the other Gears games?
The two moons, no.
Yeah.
In fact, it was one of the very first things we had to do. Was like we came to the idea like, hey, okay, we want two moons, and like we think because all the reasons I just said, and we're like, so then we had to go to Bonnie and go, Bonnie, two moons. Does anybody talk about two moons? She goes, there's a reference in one of the books on page blah. It says by the two moons of like, that's enough. That's all we needed. Okay, good. We got
wow.
two moons.
Wow. So it already was in there.
No other Gears game actually shows a second moon in the sky.
Okay.
You're the first.
Vengeville writes in and he says, are the Swarm a devolved species of the Locust? They look earthy and may give the impression to some that the Swarm are a step below from the Locust.
Well, the thing we really strive for was we wanted because it's the first night, we wanted is ferality a word? They have a certain ferality. We wanted them to be more.
Look it up, kids.
I think I own it now. If it's not a real word, it's now mine. TM, ferality. Rod says it's more ferality. So no, but the notion of there being more feral, like we wanted a more instinctual, more feral kind of beast that was more driven by instincts rather than I'm a soldier marching in a line to a commanding officer who tells me this. We wanted that more instinctual. I'm a bear who's pissed off, right? Like we want that more feeling to it. Uh-huh. So that's certainly something we've been trying to drive to.
Sure. Marky60 writes in and says the previous games had some pretty solid emotional beats. Can we expect the same in Gears of War 4?
That's the hope. That's the hope. That's one of the things where we really focused on trying to bring stuff like the Maria scene and the Dom scene. Like those are things that meant a lot, and that's where I felt like we kind of. Well, I think Gears is different. I think Gears has it has its own banter kind of stuff, but it has an emotion level that I don't think, these types of games or this type of an action game often reach for. And I think for the most part, we've been successful with them. I mean, when I go to a Comic-Con panel and say, hey, who in the room, I'm talking to 2,000 people, and I go, who in the room cried when, during the Marie scene, or cried during the Dom scene? Like, most of the room raises their hand. And like, if you were to talk to somebody at a bar about Gears of War, and like, hey, I make a game with a guy, with a chainsaw bayonet sawing monsters in half, and I go, and I make people cry, like, that doesn't make sense to them, right?
Sure.
And so to me, I think that's an important part of what makes Gears, like, the not taking ourselves too seriously, so we're willing to have banter and humor, but at the same time allowing ourselves to say, like, you know what, this is a human moment, we're gonna engage in it.
Sure. In a similar vein, Stephen Bastian writes in, he says, I know that Gears 4 is an action game, but you also said that you wanted it to be intimate. Is there a possibility that we could see a little bit more of a romance in this game?
The Gears of War dating sim.
Yes.
Well, it does have a playable sex scene, so that makes it interesting.
Oh, interesting.
Oh, that old sex box one.
Ooh,
Yeah,
with one of the swarm.
You do not want to know what the active reload does. Yeah, I mean, I think there is some. I think that the intimacy is about the squad. I think it's also about the combat. It's also about your relationship with the world and those sorts of things. So, yeah, I don't. But there is the potential for something there between the three that's going on with Kate and JD potentially, but I don't know whether we explore that in the game or that gets explored later. Those sorts of things. That's all to be kind of discovered by the player.
Okay.
Under the Two Moons, really romantic. So Joshin 2. He asks, Gears of War has usually had more of a gritty, serious tone, but there have been some pretty goofy Easter eggs. Can we expect some Easter eggs like those tucked away in Gears 4?
We'll see. Like, the Easter eggs historically have come from people waiting around for new bugs to get assigned to them. So,
Interesting.
Historically, not a lot of planning has gone into an Easter egg. And so it'll be, it's 1 a.m. We're waiting for a build to finish. And the level designer's like, I got nothing. I'm not allowed to touch anything unless I'm fixing a bug. So, cowboy hats. And they'll just, and then I got an hour to kill. I'm going to put cowboy hats in. And so historically it's been more like that. And then like, hey, we should plan it out. And so, yeah, that'll be, I think 3 had a bit more because remember 3 we were supposed to ship in April, we ended up shipping in September. And so we had an extension. So that actually added a little bit more time. And so I think some of the Easter eggs in Gears 3 are a little more like the cluck shot and the golden chicken and the ticker fighting and all that stuff. Those things were, I think, had a little bit more time because of the fact that we had more time.
So if the studio and the production is managed too well, there'll be fewer wacky Easter eggs. Is that how that works?
No, if our hair is on fire, there won't be Easter eggs. If it's managed well, then there will be Easter eggs because we'll have time. But if we're base jumping off the bug curve in order to get the game out, then there will be no Easter eggs.
All right, Thresher with a 3 asks, with the step up from UE3 to UE4, what does that bring to the table? What can you do using UE4 that you couldn't do earlier on the franchise?
I'm not the best person we should get Rainer in here to do the tech director talk, but there's a lot, like just in terms of the visual fidelity and the ease by which that allows the creatives to work with the blueprint system where designers can actually take prototypes very, very far. Like we work generally in prototypes. So any idea is generally created in a prototypical form before it becomes something, we make a decision on before it gets turned into code and put into the game. And those blueprints allow for designers and system designers to kind of almost fully realize it to a certain degree. It's just generally not performant. And so those sorts of things have been great as a set of tools. And then again, all the rendering things like allow us to really take advantage of the Xbox One and push it as a visual showcase. And I'm sure there's lots of other things I should be able to ramble off, but yeah, it's been a great engine for us, and it's allowed us because we've been able to move from UE3 to UE4. Made it easier. It hasn't made it like that's one of the things that I think most people don't quite understand is that when Epic took Unreal Engine 3 to Unreal Engine 4, they got rid of Unreal Script and as one of the languages within it. And what that has meant is that we've had to rewrite a lot of stuff. And like basically all the AI was in Unreal Script. Well, not all, but a majority of the AI was in Unreal Script. And so what that's meant is that anything we want to do at all, is we've had to start from scratch. And I mean, we have this thing to look at and say, like, I see what they were doing there, and then but we have to rewrite it in not in Unreal Script, but now in C++ or whatever. So, and though it's given us a sort of a solid step forward, because a lot like things like moving the maps, you know, if we wanted to do gridlock as a multiplayer map in Unreal Engine 4, we can move that over pretty quickly. But in terms of like deep nitty gritty code, like that stuff is, and that's why I was saying that why we're doing a beta. It's like we're not leveraging the UE3 networking code at all. It's all new. And so because of that, that's why we're doing a beta.
Sure.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Bus Waxer 25. He has a question.
Old bus waxer.
Good old Bus Waxer.
That's not that's just a guy who waxes buses, right? That's not a euphemism for anything, right?
No,
Yeah,
he's
I
a
think
professional
so.
bus waxer.
And I think
okay,
he's
professional.
25 years old. All the previous Gears of War games featured a filter for gore and swearing. Is
Yes.
4 going to continue that trend?
That's my goal. Yeah, I mean the gore is important for the obvious reasons, and swearing is too. I think that the tricky part for us, and it's been one of the funny things about it, the mature language flag, is that there's no standard, right? So and so we've had to set the bar, and in terms of like there's no George Carlin, you know, whatever 7 words or whatever is 11 words, and there's no like radio standard, you know, that changes, or we can look to and say, hey, from a video game perspective, what is how do we go from whatever mature language to non-mature language or whatever. So there is no standard by that. So we've had to make the call. And generally what we just tend to do is just take the hardest of the hard off, because we just didn't want to over bleepify our game and the production associates. So I tend to look at what's on radio, and we tend to go a little bit further than that. But so generally, I don't know if I'm allowed to say down here, but you can
Go for
bleep me, you know, but basically it's anything around the word just tends to get turned off.
Right.
Like still, like I tend to keep the I tend to keep the bitch, I tend to keep goddammits, that kind of stuff, just because it speaks to the characters and the thing they're in, and I didn't want to over bleep it. And so we just sort of focus on the hardest of the hard words. So when you turn the mature language off, you're basically not going to hear the word anymore.
Gotcha.
Well, I think that's a nice feature, especially for
Yeah,
people with
that's great.
kids who, if they're for some reason playing Gears of War, but
Well, the problem is we actually encountered, like, one of the things that got it was the person playing and the kid in the room.
yeah.
It wasn't the other kid was playing. It was walking by. Daddy's trying to play the game, and kid or mommy's trying to play the
sure.
game, and kid walks in and hears, you know, mother, and then you go like, oh damn, like, and because it's a we tend to be a hypocritical lot, right, around language and sex and violence, that we tend to, I'm 100% that way. Like
Mhm.
I have a, you know, my son, he's now 14, but when he was 12, I would say, oh, there's a PG-13 movie. And I go, what is it for? And I would look up, like, is it for sex, language, or violence? And they would be like, it's for language and violence. I'm like, okay, let's go watch it, right?
Uh-huh.
But
Oh,
sex,
A boob is shown once. Oh, hell no, you're not seeing that. Like, you
No
know,
way.
so it's like,
you're never seeing a boob, kid.
yeah. So you know, so it's that kind of thing where you go like, you know, I'm okay letting my son watch me chainsaw a monster in half. That's
Right.
cool. But if he says "F you" when he does it, oh God, like, you know, like that's
If the monster's boob pops out, we're really gonna be
Yeah,
in
it's
trouble.
gonna be a disaster. Well, great. Crew Hunter, he has a question. A couple questions, actually. Will any characters be able to ride the coal train? Will any characters make sounds like the coal train? And will there be any cameos of the coal train? And in case you didn't know or pick up on this, he adds, I like the coal train.
like the coal train. It's actually been really funny because Eugene occasionally will do a coal train like sound when he gets excited, and we've had to be like, like, I'm okay with you coming up with your own thing, but you can't woo or even come close to a woo, because that's just not doable. So that's been funny. We've been trying to, like, you know, parse that off.
So Dell couldn't be a fan of Coltrane in universe. Maybe he just saw him on TV. You know.
Yeah, he could be a fan, for sure. But the idea of just bringing it to life the way he was, like, a lot of people are doing a sort of this homage to the Coltrane, and so, and it's just so well known. Like, even, you know, Liam doing JD, sometimes when we're ad-libbing and stuff, he'll do a big woo just because it fits in the moment. You're like, sorry, dude, like, that sounds not making it.
Fans would enjoy that too much. We can't have that. Come on.
Wahoo!
Yeah. Well, the ad-libs are funny because the thing is, you let the actors go, and two things, like one thing that's really funny is that you tell any actor, like, come up with your own version of this, like, hey, we're doing combat chatter and you're killing a guy now, you know, you do one, right, and you be creative, and they always swear, they always say F***. Like, you're really the first thing, like, I'm like, okay, you're curb stomping a guy, what do you say? And he goes, F*** you, and I'm like, no, come on, something else, right? And then you get the, like, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, and you're like, there's no Jesus on Earth. Like, you have to come up with something
What
else.
is Sarah's
like,
equivalent of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph?
well, you even got like the guy who plays the we have both the guys actually because they're older guys. The guys who play Dizzy and Jason, and the guy who plays Hoffman, Jamie. They do that like sweet Christmas or whatever. Like they use Christmas as a swear word or as their sort of like clean swear word. And I'm like, dude, there's no Christmas on Sarah. Stop it. Like, it was just like that. Those funny things that we have these certain things where you go like, this is off limits. This is off limits. Like, so you can't say Jesus. You can't say Christmas. You know, like that kind of stuff. It's really funny.
Well, you should just come up with a rule that the F word isn't a swear word. And Sarah, really, it's just a flower or something.
Right.
So
Then
it's fine.
That's the name of their Jesus.
That would be the weirdest
That's true.
thing
That
ever.
could be.
I picked you a I'm like, what? That's not it.
I'm giving you a bouquet.
It's like, oh, look, no given. No.
Look at this field of
Exactly.
Anyway, I don't even know how you say this name, but Materials.
Materials, man.
Oh, but like Materials says, since the story is meant as a launching platform for a bigger narrative spanning multiple games, and the studio was formed to create Gears games, is it possible that we'll see branching side stories with spin-off titles? Maybe a Gears MOBA. I can totally see it working with COG versus Locust / Swarm.
Right. Right now, like we're heads down on 4. So the fact that we have an entire studio dedicated to one IP, I can see where we'd want to try to explore and understand the other things we can do with Gears as an IP that Epic didn't really have the opportunity to do. But like every single person inside this building with me today is working on Gears 4. So,
are you hoping to like staff up to a point where you can split the team in the future, or just hoping that somehow things will change?
Yeah, I mean, the staff up part is hard. I don't want to staff up much more than what we already are. And so to me, it's more about efficiencies. And then I think this first one is a huge, like, okay, now we can really build on top of that, right? But going from nothing to something like, Gears 5 will be something that'll be, we've already, well on the way, if you will, right? So I think I'm hoping that through better processes or more refined processes that we've learned through the building of Gears 4 and through greater efficiencies now that we've gotten over the hump of moving over everything into UE4, that will free up an opportunity to potentially explore other things.
But I mean, you're one of the video game industry's legendary producers. You must realize that like everybody says that, and then when you get to the next one, you realize like, oh, it's all hands on deck every single time.
Yeah, well, I can answer your question the way you want me to answer it, or I can tell you that. No. Yeah, no, that's true, and that's one of the things that was true for that is. I mean, you do speak true. Like to get Ultimate Edition out, we had to take a small part of our Gears 4 team and put it on Ultimate Edition for a little while to finish it, like because those sorts of things happen for sure. But I think that's one of the things. What you do is, I think once you get to a place, you carve something off, and then you hold yourself honest to it. And yeah, do you eventually potentially borrow? We did that for Gears 1. Like we shut down Unreal Tournament 3 development and brought the entire team onto Gears 1 to get it out.
Yeah.
So sometimes the reality is that, but the goal, and I think if you hold yourself accountable to it, is to find a way to segregate that and allow for it to not be consumed every time.
Sure. Yeah, definitely.
Great. Kill Moves 37 asks, was the name Gears of 4 considered at all?
Gears of 4, no. But the one thing that was considered that it killed instantly was the replacing of the A with the 4.
Oh, thank God you were that barrier.
Yeah. And so I was like, whatever anybody pitches me, we are not doing that. And they're like, okay. And then the Fantastic Four came out with the A with the 4. And I'm like, see? You don't do that.
That's why. That was the reason that movie sucked.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You did mention at the studio, Rod, that like you guys talked about just naming it Gears 4. Like even at E3 at the end, the title screen just says Gears 4.
Yeah, that was marketing letting me get my way for at least for the tease. Like for the tease, Rod can do what he wants, but when we ship it, we're going to call it Gears of War. And I was like, okay. But I mean, I just felt like I think Gears. I think Gears. When people say Gears, you know what we're talking about now. And I sort of felt like the of war. I don't know. I felt it was like, I don't know. I think it's fine. I think it'd be great. But I did pitch pretty strongly to call it Gears 4.
Gotcha. Cool.
Sounds good. The Relaxing Wind has a question. Will this be a good Gears game?
Yes, we're in the last 2.
As I point to my blank wrist. Look.
Look at this time. Yeah, if you have time. This one's a short one.
Yeah, I have time for one more.
All right, great.
So pick your best.
Let's go for materials here.
Oh, well, Materials then. Okay. He asks, will we see new gameplay before E3?
I
think he's assuming not counting the beta, yeah.
Damn it. see, going through all the marketing beats. Not counting the beta, well, you see new gameplay before E3. Maybe, yeah. I think the beta should count. Like I think you're going to get, not only are you getting to see, you're getting to play, and you're able to feed back to the team with enough time to actually respond to that feedback. So I think it should count. It should totally count.
Yeah. Okay, it should count. I guess it counts then.
Cool. Well, that's it for reader questions. Wanted to give you a chance though, Rod. I mean, I assume you've followed our coverage a little bit. Is there anything we got wrong? Anything you want to clarify? Anything you see confusion about?
Tell us to flower off.
Yeah, exactly. I think the two things that maybe Adam can whisper to me. You know, I think one is I just want to make sure people are clear. I think, and partly I wasn't in Chuck's interview, and he said a couple things that I want to make sure that people don't latch onto. One is the survival horror thing. I think, you know, we talked about being a darker, tenser, more dramatic tone, but we're not a disempowered fright fest of walking down hallways backwards in the dark, afraid of what's, you know what I mean? Like I told you guys separately, it was like, hey, when you have a big buff guy with a chainsaw in his hand, it's hard to be that scared, right? Like you have a solution to the problem, you know. It's like, and so we are going for a darker, more intimate tone, but we're not survival horror, so please don't latch onto that.
Gotcha.
The other thing is that at the end of your interview, he was talking about like, where the future could go for us.
Yeah.
Story perspective, and you said, that sounds like a hell of a cliffhanger. The reality, and people have tweeted to me like, cliffhanger, what the hell? Like, and reality is that the story itself, the story that you play in Gears 4 has a beginning, middle, and end. What Chuck is alluding to is the franchise has opportunities beyond this story. That this is, as we were saying, this is the beginning of something. Like, okay, spoiler alert, you're not going to completely 100% destroy the swarm in Gears 4 and never see them again. Like, that's just, like, this is the beginning of something, right? So therefore, something has to live on to go like, okay, there's a future here, right? So this is building towards the future, so you can't expect it to have the same finality as Gears 3. You just can't. But at the same token, so there will be things that are still like, there'll be an openness to like, hey, I wonder where they're going to go with this, but it's not because we do the, you know, oh my God, there's this giant cliffhanger where the story doesn't actually have an end.
I'd imagine like Gears of 1 is kind of a reference point for you guys, where I feel like you guys did a pretty good job of teasing out the future with Gears of War 1 there.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And you had the little wink of like, they know not why we fight kind of thing, right? Like that kind of stuff. Like, so it's that sort of thing. You want the story to feel like I had a beginning, middle, and end, and but I also see it has a future. And that's what Chuck was alluding to.
Gotcha. Okay. I think that does it,
man.
Yeah,
sounds great.
But hey, thank you so much for
game looks cool.
Yeah, for inviting us to the studio for a couple days, and yeah, we're excited about the game.
And the thing I keep going back to, like when I watched the interviews that you guys filmed and you show the old E3 footage, I keep going like, Adam, couldn't we given them our footage? Like, I really wish that now, because at the same time it made sense. It's like, oh, this is an exclusive. Let's let them just look at the game. We'll show them where we are and all that stuff. And now I'm going like, damn it! Like, I wish because
it's not too late, Rod. It's not too late. Send that footage, man.
We'll
put it up.
Pod gameplay and like you're talking about all the pod gameplay, and you show the old poke the pod thing. I'm like, no, it's not like that at all. Like,
it's all I got, Rod. Come on, I'm trying to.
Our hands are tied behind our back.
Fault. I know it's my fault. I'm just like, so that's my one little regret.
No, that's it. But we really appreciate your time and the entire team's time. So be sure to thank them again for us. And thank you for being on the Game.
Good luck finishing it up.
Oh, thanks very much. And I'm sure I'll talk to you guys again soon.
Yeah,
definitely.
Have a great one.
And thank you for watching or listening to this episode of the Game Informer Show. Be sure to tune in next week when we'll have a regular episode waiting for you. Bye.